In this video I'm going to be comparing the throttle response of three different cars. The first one is this car here. It's a 1998 Porsche 996 Carrera 2. It has a 3.4 litre flat six engine developing around 300 horsepower. The intake system on this has a single throttle on here, the air going then into a plenum and being distributed to the 6 cylinders. The second car we'll be using is this car here. It's a 2003 E46 BMW M3 CSL. This has a slightly smaller engine. It's a 3.2 litre, again 6 cylinders but straight rather than flat this time. This is developing just short of 360 horsepower, so more powerful than the Porsche engine. The intake system is quite different on here. It has 6 individual throttles, so there's no large central plenum, so in theory that should give better throttle response. The third car, which isn't here at the moment, is a 2020 Boxster, which I believe is a 2.5 litre 4-cylinder turbocharged engine, so I'm expecting that to not have such good throttle response. So I'll run the three cars one at a time, log the data, and then I shall analyse it. First up is the 996. I've just driven round for 10 or 15 minutes just to get everything all warmed up and ready to go. This is the display for the measurement system that I'm using, so I can see on here what the vehicle speed is. I can also do braking distance measurements and things, but I'm not going to be using it for that this time. It's just to make sure everything's operating correctly. And I've also got a GoPro rigged up so that I can record the runs without obviously having to hold a phone. So the plan is start off slowly into second gear at round about 1500 revs, and then accelerate through second gear up to the speed limit, which is basically 60 miles per hour on here. So that'll give me my baseline test. I will do 2 or 3 of those, trying to do them on pretty much the same piece of road, and then once they're done I will then repeat, but starting off at 2.5 or 3 or 4,000 revs instead of from a lower speed. So I'll change over to the GoPro now and get some data recorded. Here is the data from the 996. Unfortunately I had a problem with the GoPro, so haven't got any footage from that. But the tests as described, starting from a low engine speed for the reference test, which is the red line in this bottom right hand graph, accelerating up to the red line. This was done in second gear. Then for the other subsequent tests, starting off in this case at 2500 RPM, then snapping the throttle open, and what I'm interested in is how long it takes from when the throttle is applied to when we reach the full acceleration. So this bottom graph here is showing the speed trace. This top right hand graph is showing the acceleration. So the red line is our reference line and the other colours show the individual tests. So if I look at the length of time taken from throttle application until we reach the peak acceleration, until we match the acceleration, is around about 0.13 of a second, so 130 milliseconds at 2500 RPM. This graph on the left hand side is the longitudinal jerk rate, so this is how quickly the acceleration is being applied, and we're seeing a peak value here of around about 3.3 G per second. So that's at 2500 RPM. Just switch over to the 4000 RPM test. So again, same test method, and if I look at the time on here, so this is around about 0.1 of a second. So it's slightly faster at the higher engine speed, not massively so, but it is a decrease, so down to about 100 milliseconds from 130 milliseconds. This will be due to the higher volume of air that's going through the engine, so the plenum is going to fill up and be emptied more quickly. So that's the data from the 996. Now to move on to the CSL. Now changed over to the BMW. As before in the Porsche, everything is all warmed up, ready to go. So I'm going to start off with doing the test from low engine speed up towards the red line, or up to the speed limit, whichever comes first, in second gear, and then I shall repeat the same test as we did in the Porsche. Here is the data from the CSL, so the same test as done on the 996. So in terms of the times from this, so at 2500 RPM, it's taking around about 90 milliseconds from throttle application to achieving peak acceleration. So we're getting faster response than in the 996. And if we look at the 4000 RPM examples, so this is around about 100 milliseconds. So there's no significant difference between the 2500 RPM and 4000 RPM. They're both round about 100 milliseconds. So that's because there's no real volume of air between the throttle and the intake valves. And if we look at the jerk rate on here, we're seeing jerk rates of around about 4.2. So we're getting higher jerk rates on the CSL than we are in the 996. So that kick you get from the sudden acceleration is more pronounced in the CSL. I've borrowed a 718 Boxster, so this is the new 2-litre 4-cylinder turbocharged engine. So I'm going to repeat the test in this so we can see the effect of having to wait for the turbos to spool up. And finally, the data from the 718 Boxster. This one was done at around about 3000 RPM. So it's not a direct comparison to either the 2500 or the 4000 RPM, but it should be somewhere in the middle. So again, the red line is our reference line on here. This is done over a longer test. This is actually 6 seconds as shown on this bottom graph. The top graph with the acceleration is 2 seconds. So red line is our reference, and the yellow and the blue lines are for our test. So if we have a look on here, so we're starting to accelerate somewhere around this point, and we're matching the acceleration from here. So that is 1.1 seconds. So it's a massive difference compared to the 996 and the CSL. This is entirely due to the fact that this is a turbocharged engine, and when we're going along at 3000 RPM with hardly any throttle application, the turbos are not spinning, so it's taking time for the turbos to spin up, and you really feel that when you're in the car. You can really feel how slow the response of the car is. So that's the conclusion is there's really not a lot of difference between the 996 and the CSL. The CSL does have very slightly better throttle response at low engine speeds, but at the high engine speeds it doesn't make a significant difference, and they are both absolutely light years ahead of the 4-cylinder Boxster in terms of the throttle application.